Let's move to basketball. Nebraska basketball, obviously trying to make the NCAA tournament. The men's basketball team, we'll talk about the women in a minute. The player that obviously has taken a lot of attention is Brice Williams, who has on a run of 20-point games, has taken this team and really made it his team. When they need a basket late, everybody clears out and lets Brice go to work. Even if he doesn't shoot the shot, he's the guy that around whom the offense is sort of oriented. It makes me wonder. Nebraska moved to the Big Ten for basketball in 2011, 2012. Doc Sadler's last season was also Nebraska's first season in the Big Ten. And it makes me curious, Evan, if Brice Williams is the best basketball player at Nebraska of the Big Ten era. And the other players I thought of were Teran Petaway and Siobhan Shields and James Palmer and Glenn Watson, maybe Isaiah Roby. I don't know if Roby did enough. he probably had the most potential of the bunch, but I don't know that he did enough in his first two seasons here to warrant that. But as you think about it, is Brice Williams the best player of the Big Ten era?
To me, it's either him or Palmer, I would say. I mean, in a lot of ways, they're pretty similar guys. I mean, Palmer was a guy who could always create his own shot, and that team needed him to do that quite a bit. I was looking a little bit at some of the numbers of the guys that you were talking about, and I think Palmer and Williams, their cases are that they one could create their own shot anytime. They didn't necessarily need to get it in the context of the offense or to be set up, but then also they made those guys around him better. I mean, Palmer would draw double teams and dish it out and generate offense that way. And I think Williams is earning enough respect in the league now where he's getting extra attention, and that's allowing other guys to thrive. Now, whether they come through in those moments is hit and miss, but I mean, it's almost kind of jarring to see a Nebraska basketball player um, succeeding, being as efficient as Williams is. You're so used to seeing kind of these long scoring droughts, and you got to kind of get hot with the shot, and but like Williams has just been steady every time out. Like you can count on him for 15 to 20 and a few clutch rebounds and setting up his teammates. And now Nebraska's winning too. So maybe at the end of the year, Williams is that guy in part because of the numbers, but also in part because of the fact that Nebraska is winning and they are in this conversation to be an NCAA tournament team on the positive side of the bubble here. And I mean, certainly history shows that whatever sport you're talking about, if that team is good and makes a run, their best player is going to be remembered pretty fondly, and they're going to get the benefit of the doubt when it comes to all Big Ten votes and All America consideration. So I think when you add in that winning context to what Brice Williams doing, yeah, I think you can make that conversation that he's Nebraska's best player in the Big Ten era.
I think if they make the NCAA tournament, it's hard to argue against him being the best. I think that makes him number one because he would be the first player to be on two NCAA tournament teams. I'm counting, obviously, Sam Hoiberg is on both teams as well. But that would be pretty significant, in my opinion, for him to be a part of two different teams. Petaway might be the guy that I would pick if I was just picking a guy for one game in terms of offense and defense. I think Petaway has got a lot. But Petaway was part of one team that went to the NCAA tournament, and the second team, kind of melted down, and that wasn't his fault. He was going through obviously his family, has lost his mom, and that was very difficult. That wasn't really about him. It just was that they struggled that second season for a variety of reasons. I also thought of Shields. I think Siobhan Shields had to span a couple of different coaching staffs and a couple different eras. I don't know that it was always easy for him. I think he never played for Doc, but he was recruited by Doc, and you know he had he was good. I mean, Siobhan Shields was a good basketball player. So 3-point shooter. Brice is better at that. I think there were a lot of different things Shields could do. He was probably a better rebounder than Brice, but I thought it was close. I would not rank Palmer quite as high, I think, as you do. I actually
Okay.
think the teams that he was on had some guys. Now I did add him into this conversation, but he had the best point guard of the bunch in Glenn Watson. And then and then for a season and a half, he had Isaac Copeland. And that was a ball player. And of course, Copeland got hurt midway through Miles' last season. And then they had Roby. So like I always kind of thought he had maybe some of the better players around him. I've always kind of thought maybe Tim Miles' team, the 122, got a little bit screwed, not making the NCAA tournament. But that was a good basketball team. And so, that one's close for me, but I did add him. I think both of us would agree that the best player of the 21st century at Nebraska is Alex March. Yes.
Oh yeah. Yep.
And he never made an NCAA tournament. But I think we would agree that he is the sort of the standard bearer of that era. And yes, Cookie Belcher slightly gets into that era because he was part of Danny's final team, and and I guess that got him into 2000. But Cookies doesn't belong to this century really. He's more of the player from 1997, 98, 99. So I think March is probably number one, and then it could be the Brice's number two. I don't, I think Brice
I mean,
might be number two.
I like to frame it kind of like if you're starting a team, like who do you build around? And so March would be that guy, but I think Brice Williams might be number two of these guys that we're talking about, especially in the Big Ten era. Like who do you take out of the
Right.
bunch
Well,
that
yeah.
that we're listening to start around?
If you told me you guaranteed me some guy was going to be there 4 years, I might take Roby.
Okay.
I might.
I
Or
mean,
I
his
might take,
he hit his
in
potential
theory, I
later
would
on.
take I would take Bryce McGowan's if you told me he was going to be there 4 years, but Bryce was only here 1 year. So like Bryce may have been a spectacular player for one season, but I don't think you can have him in a conversation because he was just here for the 1 year. Um, but yeah, if you said, well, I guarantee you four, and I think if Roby had stayed that fourth year and he had been part of Fred's first team, well, A, that would have been a hell of a lot better team. And B, I think Roby would be in that conversation
Yeah, I
because
agree.
Roby was talented.
He was, but
He was an amazing player.
he went on to develop in the NBA. I
A
think
little
that's
bit.
why we would look
Yeah.
back on him and see what he became in the NBA. And
Right.
he was good at Nebraska, but he wasn't as good as he became. So like I think we're seeing it with Williams, and he had a good year last year too, but I think he's also an example of a guy who's developed about as well as anybody in recent years for Nebraska. Like his game I think is more well-rounded now than it was a year ago, and they're doing it within a system and they're winning games. So I think it's as much a testament to Fred and their staff and what they were able to do uh, in terms of his role, in terms of his development, that they're where they are right now. And it's very
Yeah,
impressive.
for sure. I never, I think the most successful pro of the 21st century at Nebraska, and again, Tehran played in the 90s, is Delano Banton. And I wouldn't have,
Yeah,
would I guess. But of course, he left here again a year before they thought he would. I think they were hoping he would come back, and he did not. I think if Brice Williams does it, then he's going to be your best player of the Big Ten era. And he's probably not going to win Big Ten Player of the Year. I wrote about that in a rewind a couple weeks ago. I actually think that the guy that might end up winning it is the 7-footer from Michigan, but it's going to be between the 7-footer from Michigan, Braden Smith, and John Tonji, the Omaha Central grad. I think Tonji's going to get some votes. He is the reason that they're as good as they are. It's an incredible senior season that he's having. Braden Smith's probably the best player, and then but this Danny Wolf guy is, people are going to get to see him next Monday. I mean, that guy's an artist. He's an incredible player for 7 foot. I think he leads the team in assists. Um, that's a neat player. That's a big one for Nebraska. If they win that game, if they beat Penn State tonight and then they go beat Michigan, I think they're in the dance.
agreed.
But Michigan's a tall order. They're going to be a tough team to beat.